At Minden in 1759, British and Hanoverian infantry advanced toward the French before they were supposed to. Artillery tore into the formation. French cavalry came forward. Men fell, gaps opened, and smoke covered the field. Yet the battalions did not scatter. They closed their ranks, held against the cavalry, and returned to the advance. To a modern observer, this looks almost impossible. Why would soldiers walk toward loaded muskets and cannon? Why not spread out, find cover, or simply run across the dangerous ground? The answer is not that 18th century soldiers were fearless. It is that the slow, ordered advance was part of the weapon they were carrying into battle. An infantry battalion was not just a crowd of men holding muskets. It was a firing system. Soldiers usually fought in closely ordered ranks, often 2 or 3 men deep. That formation placed as many muskets as possible along the front. One smoothbore musket was an uncertain weapon. Hundreds firing together were far more dangerous, but massed fire only worked if the men remained aligned, loaded together, obeyed commands, and pointed their weapons in the same direction. The line also concentrated bayonets. A steady battalion could resist cavalry, protect its flanks, and move as a single body. Once the formation dissolved, much of that power disappeared. The army did not send individual marksmen forward and hope that courage would carry the day. It moved an organized machine made of human beings. Running sounds safer because it reduces the time spent under fire. For one man, it sometimes could. For several hundred men carrying muskets, ammunition, packs, and bayonets across uneven ground, it created another danger: disorder. The faster a long line moved, the harder it became to keep straight. Some men stepped around holes or bodies. Others moved too quickly. Some fell behind. Files compressed in one place and opened in another. Within moments, officers could lose the formation they needed for the next volley. A disordered battalion could not deliver controlled fire. It could not change direction cleanly. And it was far more vulnerable to cavalry or a counterattack. Running also exhausted soldiers before the final moments of the assault. So the advance was usually measured, not because commanders wanted their men exposed for longer, but because arriving together mattered more than arriving first. The battlefield was deadly, but it was not filled with continuous automatic fire. A flintlock musket had to be loaded by hand through a sequence of movements. Even well-trained troops needed time between shots, and battlefield smoke made the next volley harder to aim and control. Artillery could be more terrifying. Round shot might tear through multiple ranks, while canister became especially dangerous at closer distances. But every weapon still had a rhythm. Infantry commanders tried to use that rhythm. A battalion might advance, halt, dress its ranks, fire, reload, and move again. In other situations, it might endure the enemy's volley before answering at a more effective distance. There was no single method used in every army or every battle. Soldiers did not always walk silently from one end of a field to the other. The measured advance was one stage in a contest of timing, cohesion, and nerve. Keeping that formation alive required constant control. Orders had to travel through voices, drums, flags, mounted messengers, and officers visible along the line. Sergeants and corporals corrected alignment, repeated commands, watched the files, and pushed men back into position. When smoke hid the enemy, soldiers could still see the men beside them, their officers, and the regimental colors. That mattered because an 18th century battlefield could become almost impossible to read. Noise drowned out commands. Smoke erased landmarks. Units drifted away from their intended direction. A battalion that lost its place might expose another unit's flank or fire into the wrong space. Drill was designed to reduce those decisions. Under stress, a soldier did not need to invent a plan. He followed the movement he had practiced with the men around him. The formation gave him direction when the battlefield no longer did. The purpose of advancing was not always to collide with the enemy in a long bayonet fight. Often, the approach itself created the decision. A line that continued forward after taking fire showed that it had not broken. Its muskets were coming closer. Its bayonets were still level. Its officers were still in control. The opposing troops then faced their own test. Would they hold for another volley? Would they begin to step backward? Would a few men turn and pull the rest with them? Many attacks ended when one side lost cohesion before prolonged hand-to-hand fighting began. At the final stage, the attackers might quicken their pace or charge. But that speed only had value if the formation had survived the approach. A charge by an ordered battalion could become a shock. A charge by a scattered crowd could become a retreat in the wrong direction. None of this means the soldiers were calm. They were frightened. Some froze. Some fired too early. Some left the ranks, hid or ran. Discipline was never perfect, and punishment alone cannot explain why whole units continued forward. Men advanced for many overlapping reasons. They had been trained to move with the group. They trusted familiar comrades. They watched officers expose themselves to the same fire. They feared disgrace, punishment, cavalry, or being isolated more than they feared the next few steps. Some believed in their regiment, their cause, or their own reputation. Most importantly, standing inside the formation could feel safer than leaving it. A lone man running across open ground had little firepower, little protection, and no clear idea where safety actually was. The line was terrifying. But outside the line, the battlefield could be even more dangerous. 18th century soldiers did use cover when the situation allowed it. Light infantry and riflemen operated in looser formations. Troops fought from woods, walls, buildings, ditches, and broken ground. Commanders adapted when terrain and missions demanded it. But line infantry had a different task. It had to seize ground, deliver massed fire, withstand cavalry, and force an enemy formation to give way. To do that, the battalion had to arrive as a battalion. That is why soldiers often marched into enemy fire instead of sprinting through it. The measured pace preserved the line. The line preserved firepower. Firepower and cohesion gave the unit its best chance of surviving long enough to win. They were not walking forward because bullets did not frighten them. They were walking forward because, in the warfare of their time, breaking formation could be more dangerous than keeping it.